I'm going to spend some time now just going through Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Let's start with the second paragraph. He describes the Emancipation Proclamation as a great beacon light of hope. Now, that is a metaphor. He's comparing the Emancipation Proclamation to being a light of hope. Think about the kinds of things that metaphor conjures. Why does he describe it as a light? I guess the connotation there is that it is a light shining in the darkness, perhaps the darkness of the oppression that African American slaves endured. He talks also about the fact that the injustice they faced were like flames. Again, this is another metaphor, and perhaps even conjures in our mind an image of being branded like African American slaves were. They were branded by their slave owners as an ownership signal, or even as punishment for trying to escape. He says that the Emancipation Proclamation was a joyous daybreak, again another metaphor, to end the long night of their captivity. Captivity, of course, connotes that slavery past. Now, so far you would see that the metaphors he's used there use light imagery, and this light imagery helps to convey hope to his audience, that daybreak is coming, there is new hope, new life, a great beacon light of hope is coming through the civil rights movement. In the third paragraph, you will notice that he starts to talk about the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. So these are again metaphors, and these metaphors are used deliberately because they conjure in the mind of the audience the slavery past that African American people in America experienced up until 1863. The idea of being in manacles and in chains is very much conjuring those ideas of slavery. And the purpose of that metaphor is to try and connect with his audience and to convey that the Jim Crow laws that they face and the discrimination they face is limiting and blocking their potential the same way that slavery did. He uses some very emotive words in that paragraph. He explains that the Negro is still languished. Languished means to lose or to lack vitality. So the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society, and he finds himself an exile, an outcast. These are emotive terms. And so we come here today to dramatise a shameful condition. That's a very emotive word. He is trying to connect his audience with his key concerns. He's trying to passionately convey in an emotive way the discrimination that is being faced by and is something that we should feel emotion about. He's trying to conjure, I guess, feelings of anger or feelings of outrage at the injustice of this situation. In the next paragraph, he uses an extended metaphor. He talks about coming to the nation's capital to cash a check. He's saying that African Americans, and rather all Americans, have a promissory note. They fall heir to certain things. And he says that Americans fall heir to the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he's saying that for African Americans, America has defaulted on this check. I don't know if you know how a check works, but a check is like a written promise that sum will be given to that person that the check is written out to. And he is saying that a promise has been written to all Americans, and that the promise is being reneged on or failed to be delivered on for African Americans. He's saying that they metaphorically are going to the bank of justice, not a literal bank, a metaphorical bank, and they are asking for justice, and they are just getting back insufficient funds. Now, this extended metaphor is something that we call a conceit. Conceit is another word for an extended metaphor. And in this case, it is a bankruptcy conceit. That's what you would call it, a bankruptcy conceit. And conceit is spelled C-O-N-C-E-I-T. And this continues on into the next paragraph where Martin Luther King Jr. says the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. He goes on to say that this is the point of the March of Washington. They're coming to the nation's capital today to cash the check, to cash in their check that says justice should be given to them, that justice should be given to all mankind, that every American gets those unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He's also suggesting that by America reneging on their promise of the pursuit of happiness for all, of life and liberty for all, that in some way they are morally bankrupt by their failure to grant civil rights to all Americans. So that's a really important device used in those two paragraphs. We come to the next paragraph where again there is some more light imagery. He talks about the dark and desolate valley of segregation and the sunlit part of racial justice. Now this is an example of antithesis. Antithesis is using two opposites that are introduced side by side for a contrasting effect. It's like he's using these two examples of what is currently happening and what he wants in society to happen to show their contrast, to show the change that he wants to happen. And he uses this technique of antithesis throughout the speech. He says, this is currently what's happening, a dark, desolate valley of segregation, and this is what we are fighting for, a sunlit path of racial justice. He talks about the quicksands of racial injustice and the solid rock of brotherhood in which they're campaigning for, in which all of God's children can experience the reality of justice. So that is that paragraph, that's antithesis, and again coming back to that light imagery. We see again the light imagery return in the next paragraph at the very end. He is talking about the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. Again, that light imagery. And that use of light imagery throughout his speech conjures in the mind of the audience hope that there is something bright and positive to look forward to, that's instilling confidence, I guess, that the darkness, the fear, the oppression will end and that there will be a bright day, a new day of hope. So these are all metaphors, or you could refer to them as light imagery. In the next paragraph down, he uses this repetition of this high modality phrase, we must not, we must rise, we must forever. And if you read these lines, you'll realise that he's talking about non-violence. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to denigrate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights and meet physical force with soul force. This contrasts with the marvellous new militancy in the next paragraph, and Malcolm X, who we will study his speech later on. He was one of the men during the civil rights movement that advocated a different approach to civil rights. Where Martin Luther King Jr. was non-violent in his approach, Malcolm X, one of his phrases or the slogans he referred to was, by any means necessary. We will get justice and we will do that by any means necessary. If that means violence on the streets, we will get justice by any means necessary. If we go down a few paragraphs, I'm now looking at the paragraph that begins, there are those who are asking, the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? You'll see that there is a wonderful rhetoric device used here where he repeats, we can never, we can never, we can never. That collective language, I guess that you could use, you could call that an inclusive pronoun, we collective, can never. It is futuristic in its tense, we can never, and it's also very high in modality. Never is a high modality term. We can never be satisfied, we can never be satisfied, we can never be satisfied is the same thing that's repeated. And the point of this is that he is trying to persuade, he's trying to emphasize his supporters to keep fighting. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is victim to the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. That's just an interesting rhetoric device to engage the audience, reinforce the point. We are not to give up. We are to continue to fight for justice until we all have justice. And he ends that paragraph with a biblical intertextual reference to Amos 5:24. And he uses this to appeal to his Christian audience, but it also brings hope. It's very figurative in its language. Justice rolls down like water, that's a simile, and righteousness like a mighty stream. That justice will be cleansing. Waters are cleansing. It's refreshing. So the imagery in that biblical text is powerful in also conveying his message to his audience. If we keep going down, you will find the iconic phrase, I have a dream. Of course, I'm skipping over lots and lots of techniques, and you may have already annotated some of these techniques, but I'm trying to pick out a few key ones. I have a dream. Now, this is an example of anaphora. It is a phrase that is repeated throughout. Try and steer away from analysis that says, oh, well, he repeats it to emphasize it. Well, of course he's repeating something to emphasize it, but why is he emphasizing that he has a dream? What is a dream? A dream brings hope. A dream is optimistic. A dream is a vision for the people. And that's what he's doing here. He's reminding them over and over again, I have a vision for a better future. And that's why this particular anaphora is so important. Anaphora is spelled ANAPHORA. So he repeats, I have a dream. I have a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream. And this kind of idea is very important to Martin Luther King's speech, because he is saying that essentially this dream that he has for equality for African Americans is a moral standard that underpins the American nation. He says it's a dream that's deeply rooted in the American dream, and in fact he uses an intertextual reference to the Declaration of Independence, and I'll read that quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." And this intertextual reference he uses is an important way of saying, well, this is already in our nation's documentation. This is something we hold up as who we are as Americans, and yet we're denying rights to so many people in our population, African American people. And he's trying to here point out, by using this intertextual reference, he's trying to prove the need for equality for all man, that it's already written in the documentation that underpins the American life. And in this sense, he's almost relying on the patriotic spirit of Americans, that if you are an American and you hold the truths that America holds if you hold the truths that America holds dear, you should care about equality for all man. And that's really what he's doing there with his intertextual reference. If we go down a little bit further, of course, there's lots of I have a dreams. But he starts to refer to injustice as sweltering, and he's using this thermal imagery to try and convey the oppression faced by people who experience injustice, who experience discrimination, that it feels uncomfortable. And so that thermal imagery is trying to convey to the audience the oppression and the intensity of the oppression that African American people face by not having justice, by not having equality, and by existing in a nation that permits those Jim Crow laws to exist. Then we move on to the most iconic line, I guess. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. Of course, the alliteration there of the C really emphasises these iconic lines and makes them stand out in our mind. But what Martin Luther King Jr. is doing here is he's talking about the microcosm of his family. Microcosm means small world. It's like he's saying that his family will be a representation of wider society, where his children will one day live in a world where they are not judged by their skin colour, and he's hoping that the world, in a wider sense, wider society, will also hold those values. So he's referring to the microcosm of his family, the small version of his family that represents broader society. If we keep going down, you'll notice that he continues to use biblical allusions. He refers to every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. This section from Isaiah 40, verse 5, is designed to instill hope that there will be change, and that all flesh, that superlative, all people will see the glory, continues to reinforce his point of equality for all. Finally, I'm now looking at the last page. There is another metaphor at the top of the page. He's talking about, again, another example of antithesis, that with his faith, his faith in God, and in humanity, we'll be able to hew out, that means to cut out, of the mountain of despair. Mountain of despair is a metaphor, a stone of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling chords. Jangling, another word for that would be clanging, discords, he says, the clanging discords of our nation. He's saying that the noises are dissonant. He's using a musical metaphor here to convey, on one side, what the nation is like now, and hopefully what it will become. So another example of antithesis, using two opposites introduced for contrasting effect. And he's saying, rather than being jangling discords, we're hoping that we will move into a nation that will be a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Now, symphony is a concord of sound, where sounds blend together in a beautiful and pleasing way. So that metaphor is quite powerful and further conveys to us the equality and the need for society to cooperate with itself in order to create beautiful music. Of course, that's a metaphor. He makes a reference to a song, My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. This song is called My Country 'Tis of Thee, and it's an American patriotic song by Samuel Francis Smith. It was written in 1831, and it acted as almost like an unofficial anthem in America up until about 1930. So this is a very patriotic song. The audience would be familiar with this, and the final line of the song is, "Let freedom ring." Now, this is a particular line that Martin Luther King then grabs and uses as an anaphora through the rest of his speech, as he references specific states that he wants freedom to ring in. And these are all southern states that need to have change in terms of the Jim Crow laws, particularly these states. Let freedom ring is an anaphora, but the very first word there, let, is an imperative verb. It's a commanding verb. Let this happen. Make this happen. And this anaphora is purposed to bring about hope. It's meant to inspire people. It's meant to be quite emotive in an inspiring way. Let freedom ring. It's very optimistic. And that point is reinforced, it's emphatic, and he says that a number of times. And he finishes his speech with what he says is a verse from an old Negro spiritual: free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last. And that's a really powerful exclamatory way to finish his speech. It's optimistic. It's forward thinking, and it's meant to stir a sense of emotion in the audience.